I couldn't tell if I was alive or dead. I've had the experience of moving out of space-time reality into an absolute abyss of the utter emptiness of God. We are ultimately connected to everything all the way to the Tao. It's only because God is conscious that you can be conscious. An Eckhart Tolle, a Yogananda, a Rumi, those people come here specifically to shift the consciousness. The alchemists realized that their psyche was being mirrored back by material form. The body's really a spiritual cocoon. Matter is spirit moving slowly enough that you can interact with it. So consciousness is very crystallized here. We are in a legitimate rite of passage. We're in a spiritual transition. The only way God can experience itself is to look into itself in dreams. And that's where the Tantra story of Shakti and Shiva comes from. I've been on other planets in different systems, but if you could see what's on the sun, it would absolutely blow your mind. I was in so deep, I couldn't tell if I was alive or dead. And I really had to work with my soul to navigate, to get me home. I've had the experience of moving out of space-time reality into an absolute abyss of the utter emptiness of God, and feeling that my whole ego was just completely and utterly being annihilated. And somehow I've made it home from several of these types of experiences. And when I look at near-death accounts and all the qualities of them, I've had all of those things happen to me. I was trained in various types of meditation, and I'd had these practices since I was a child. I had my first samadhi when I was 18, watching my son come out of the birth canal, and it blew me into a complete union with the universe. And then I had successive samadhis doing meditation, often sitting next to the beach, interestingly. And I worked with Master Fong Ha and did Tai Chi daily, sometimes twice a day for 18 years. And I got out there as the sun was going down. So it was probably about 5:15, and I was standing next to my water charger where I normally did Tai Chi at our previous house. And the next thing, what happened was I went so deep, and I'd had experiences with Tai Chi multiple times where I actually, when I came out of it, I felt like I was on a couple of hits of LSD, but there was no drug effect. I was just completely and utterly merged in with everything. I could feel the plants breathing. I could feel the stones vibrating. It was like a very deep medicine journey, but there was no drugs. And it was very important to me, and this is one of the reasons I studied with Master Fong Ha and practiced my meditations, is because I didn't want my the knowledge I gained through plant medicines to be written off as just drug use. I wanted to make sure that I had gone as deep as I could possibly go through natural means. So I'm telling you this story to let you know this is one example, aside from the samadhis, of something even beyond samadhi. And that was, I was just doing Tai Chi as I normally do, but for some reason that day the stars aligned, and I found myself in a place in which there is no identity. There is no thing to be conscious of. There's no mind. There was no color. There was just a vast and utter silence and emptiness of everything, of sensory input, of self-awareness. And it was so deep that I didn't even know I was there. Now, I was doing an active form of Tai Chi called the Tai Chi ruler, which is quite physical. So somehow my body and my breathing were all in harmony, and it was going on. And then all of a sudden, Angie comes walking down the stone steps, and she's like, Paul, we've been calling you for over an hour for dinner. And I heard her voice, and I kind of came out of it. And I for a minute, didn't know where I was at. I kind of had to reorient myself, but it was pitch black outside. The dew was all wet. The ground was all wet. And I'd been going for over an hour and 40 minutes. And it felt like 5 minutes had gone by. And what was so interesting about that experience is that in the plant medicine experiences where I was approaching complete annihilation and just, knowing I may never ever come back from the experience, and there was a fair bit of fear involved because I could feel my self-awareness and my ego being obliterated. But in this case, it just dissolved, and there was no fear. There was no anything. In fact, it really reminded me of Lao Tzu's passage in the Tao Te Ching where he said, the Tao is deeper than deep. It is blacker than black. It is older than God. And I really felt like I had gone past the mind into something that wasn't even conceptually graspable by the conscious mind. And that I was in the Tao. And it was such a proto-consciousness. It's hard to really describe because we don't have words or language for anything like that. Very few people, I think, really have these experiences to talk about them. And when Angie was standing there talking to me, there was a period of time where I was simultaneously in this emptiness, but was aware that I had a body and I was watching it move and talk. And I'm a remote viewer, and I started having out-of-body experiences at the age of 12, so I'm very used to moving and traveling out of my body. But it was different than that, because when I have out-of-body experiences and I do remote viewing and astral work, I can induce them. But this is like something that induced itself spontaneously. And so that experience was one of many that showed me that life and death are just the names for two halves of a circle, that there is no death, and that everything is really the flow of intelligent energy, and there is no way you can kill the soul or the spirit, and that we are ultimately connected to everything all the way to the Tao, and there is no separation. It's just that we have a body and a brain that acts as a reducing valve, like a filtration system, just like a radio can be tuned to a given frequency, but all the other frequencies are still there. You're just not aware of them. And so I was in this state where I was aware of the vast emptiness of the Tao, but I was simultaneously aware that my wife was standing there, and I could both see my body moving and talking to her, and I could also feel myself coming back into my body. Very similar to when you take a full hit of DMT, you can be vastly expanded and even one with God, but then you can slowly feel your body coming back to life and your senses turning back on. But it was different because there was no drug involved. So those are some of the experiences that I would say equate to NDEs that I've experienced, but I've probably had at least a dozen that would fit that criteria in the last, I don't know how long ago, 2006 is. This is 2025, so that's 19 years of working with these medicines, and I've been doing meditation since I was 12, and then I started with Fong Ha in 2000 actually. So he's passed away now, but I worked with him for a number of years, and he gave me the training I needed to go on my own and penetrate more deeply. I also studied and got certified in medical Qigong in 2000 and probably 2005 or earlier than that. So I've been working with a lot of different practices, and I do usually take about an hour and a half to 2 hours every day. I get up at 3:30 in the morning when nobody's around, so I can have dead quiet, and that's when I do all my different practices. So I've explored a lot of different approaches, and I felt it was my job as a therapist to really explore a lot of these different methods to the point where I understood them deeply enough to know how to prescribe them for people so that the right person gets the right practice. Otherwise, they don't stick to it and it doesn't really ultimately have a very good effect for them, you know?
When did you first start identifying as a therapist, Paul? Because I've followed Paul Chek for such a long time, and it seems like there's a real grounded, like it was very much like learning to master the body in the early days. This is me following your work, 2 decades plus ago. And then there's been this real deep shift that's come through in terms of like, yes, and the inanimate, like the spirit side of things. Have you always identified as therapist? Did you always know that there was multidimensionality to your work? Is it something that's evolved over time? And if so, what's caused the impetus for it to evolve?
My work has always been very, very deep, and it's had a spiritual component to it. I founded the Institute in 1995, and if you were to see the manual of my first Chek Level 4, which is now Integrated Movement Science 5, and what I was teaching them, you'd realize there was a deep spiritual component to it, and there's always been elements of the mind and the behavior change and those types of things. But back in the early days, I was more known for my knowledge of anatomy, physiology, health. My professional license is as a holistic health practitioner, which I went to school in '86, and I graduated from sports massage therapy school, and then I think a year later, I achieved my license as a holistic health practitioner, which in the state of California means you can do anything considered holistic health as long as it's using natural means. So for me, that was the perfect license because it gave me the ability to work on people's bodies, work on people's diet and lifestyle issues, mental, emotional stuff. But as the students evolved, and as I felt it was more important for me to help people understand what's beyond the body and get past just being strong and being fast and being fit or even just being healthy. I wanted people to understand the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual component. And as I began introducing these concepts to my more advanced students, I got a lot of pushback because they were very, very left brain, hardcore athletes. And they had a hard time with it. They couldn't calm their minds, so I would do meditations, and they were just monkey-minded, bouncing all over the place, and they had a hard time grasping it. But what happened was with each successive year, there'd be 1 or 2 advanced students that would really embody my teachings, and they would have such radical transformations that all the people around them would start asking questions like, where'd you learn this? And then so that started to inspire, and as I put more of it in my lectures traveling around the world, I started to draw people that were more holistic and more spiritually oriented. And so with that, and with my sense of responsibility to the public, I felt like people are so completely and utterly trapped in a materialistic conception. And so many of them are living in flatland and suffering from a lot of psychological and physiological and health problems from the sense of a lack of meaning in their life and doing nothing but running on the treadmill to try to pay bills all the time. And I dealt with countless cases of addiction. I mean, I would say probably 85% of my patients were dealing with 1 or more addictions, which were compensations for either the psychological stress of religious programming and the fact that they were, constantly sinning and based on these ideologies and had to repress all that to try to survive it. And then people that just were they had no sense of anything beyond money and matter. And so there was no way for them to get a deeper sense of heart connection and make meaning in life beyond just kind of surviving the environment of their work and the consequences of their family and kind of the mundanities of life.
Hey there, inspired soul. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this podcast. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your loving support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. It helps with everything we're doing here, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. Thank you so much in advance.
So I felt as an elder and somebody that had deep experience with these things, starting all the way back in childhood, that I didn't want to mislead people by letting them think if you just ate the right food and did the right exercises, that your whole life would get better. Because having been a therapist for, many of the greatest sports teams and elite athletes and movie stars and music producers and billionaires, I saw that no matter how much success or money you had, you were actually psychologically often in no better place than someone that had very little money and was struggling I worked with a lot of Mexican field workers and things that, and people that, I used to own a physical therapy clinic, so they would get sent in by corporations they were working for, like people out picking tomatoes in fields and stuff like that. So I saw the actual existence, and the things that were challenging at a psychological level didn't differ from the poor people to the rich people who had this lack of a spiritual connection. And I saw very early on in my career that you cannot get a person healthy, no matter how good the program is, if you don't address the behaviors that led to the problems that are creating the illness or the injuries. And behind all behaviors is beliefs. So I spent years studying and taking training from masters of various different disciplines and developing an evaluation system so that I could actually get behind the behavior and look into the belief systems that were driving this. And the grand majority of them turned out to be religious ideology that was at the root of their angst, their pain, and their fears and their insecurities, and addictions and fetishes. And when you couple that, what I would call religious confusion and trauma, with a materialistic world and a materialistic mindset and an objective scientific materialism that excludes the subjective aspects of life, such as feelings, emotions, and love, you have what Ken Wilber would call flatland. And so I found that as I had more and more clinical experience and worked with so many of these people, and had seen what happened to my students that actually did embrace the spiritual aspects of my teachings, that I was actually doing a disservice by not including that aspect of the truth of my work and my own experience personally and professionally into my more public lectures all over the world. And in fact, many years ago at CanFit Pro, I did a lecture. I'd lectured there every year for 19 years straight. It's the biggest conference in Canada for health and fitness. And I can't remember what year it was, but I'd been lecturing there for a long time. And my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, was published in 2004. So probably about 12 years after that, I did How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, a spiritual approach. And I had almost 600 people show up to my lecture. They kept having to move it to bigger and bigger rooms till they finally put it in an auditorium. And so I realized, wow, people really are hungry for this information. And then I began teaching things like how the chakra system works in, what would normally be considered to be fitness or health and fitness conferences. And so I started including more and more of this, and there was quite a draw to it. It really blew a lot of people's minds and helped a lot of people with religious dogma and ideology and fear heal. Many of them would come to me in tears after and say, oh my God, that's the first time I think I ever understood what God really is. And now I can really see how trapped I've been in all this, religious belief systems and stuff. So I just felt I had to, at risk of being attacked, which I'm used to because I've been attacked for a million things, I just had to be honest with people and tell them what I knew as a therapist and what I knew as a mystic and as an investigator of all aspects of life. And so what you're describing is just that me slowly opening the box of who Paul Chek really is.
I dare not call it Pandora's box.
Yeah, well, there's some truth to that. Here I am. But I got 63,000 students worldwide, so something's working out.
It's I say that lovingly because I think it's, for those that know you already know that Paul Chek takes the word holistic to a whole nother dimension. Really is probably the way that I would double click on that. You mentioned the word holistic, life and death almost being the two sides to the same coin earlier. You mentioned our multidimensionality. It's called Spirit Gym. There's this whole, I don't want to call it ideology, but there's this whole philosophy around like Earth being an Earth school, an opportunity for us to learn and develop. And I'd love to get your insights on, how deeply that resonates with you and what it means for us.
Well, one being a remote viewer and having done deep spiritual work with my soul for a very long time and traveled all over the place and met many very advanced civilizations and extraterrestrial beings and, had a chance to really talk to some highly, beings that are so far evolved beyond human beings. Some of them have told me they're 5 billion years more advanced than humanity. So you can imagine what we've done since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is only a few hundred years. Imagine being 5 billion years more advanced. It's like this. You're talking crazy, wild, advanced. I've been on other planets and different systems and seen and interacted with people mostly through the astral dimension. For example, once my soul took me to Venus and I met a great teacher there, and I met many other beings there, and there's beings that look like human, but they're different, slightly different than us. There's like beings that are crossbred from different star systems, and so they still look kind of human, but you can tell some of them are very tall and they got very big eyes. They look very Nordic, and then you see different types. It's not like Star Wars where you got all sorts of weird things, but you can tell that there's beings with very different genetics than here, and they're much more centered in themselves and much more calm and much more advanced. For example, they don't talk a lot because they communicate telepathically. And I was really, the first time I had one of these experiences, I'm like, wow, this is pretty wild, because, our scientists on Earth have been looking for life on all these different planets forever, but what they've been doing is looking for life in a material, biological way. But when you're in the astral dimension, so the funny thing is, surrounding every planet in our solar system, there's an entirely different dimension of vibration in which there's a whole, just the civilizations just like ours, except they're at different frequencies. So just like you're sitting in your room right now and you can't see television waves and radio waves, but they're filling the room. I mean, if I was to take a frequency meter in your room, you'd see that it was just all over the place, you know? And so once you go to these higher vibrational states, you enter into dimensions where there's an entire world of life. Same with the sun. I mean, I've been on the sun and just had my mind blown. We think it's just a burning ball of gas, but if you could see what's on the sun, it would absolutely blow your mind. I mean, you think we got big pyramids, wait till you see the pyramids on the sun. So, what I found out, you know, is that in these different regions and in different star systems is that there's beings that are actually going through similar types of evolution that we are, but often the whole civilization is kind of like, just like I call Earth School 1st through 3rd grade. So we're like 3rd graders, and then you get occasional teachers that come here to kind of upskill people. So an Eckhart Tolle or a Yogananda or, you know, a Rumi, you know, those people come here specifically to shift the consciousness and help bring the vibration up, to help us wake up to a deeper truth of ourselves. But there's places where there's Rumis all over the place, and that's just normal, right? And so they would be like, you know, university level, metaphorically. And so through all my experiences, I realized that there is nothing but God. There is nothing beyond God. God is that for which there is no other. God is the only being that can create and sustain itself, and it's the source of everything in every dimension and all realities. And God is consciousness itself. It's only because God is conscious that you can be conscious. And so what I found is that God, which has infinite energy, infinite intelligence, infinite processing power, infinite processing speed, infinite creativity, is ultimately trying every possibility at once. And so the entire multiverse and omniverse, it's kind of like a horizon. You know, you keep trying to get to the horizon, you know, but, you know, it's just like our idea of how big the universe is changes every time we make a bigger telescope, you know, and we're like, oh my God, there's more. And so there's no end to God, right? And so because the evolution of God never began and never ends, it's infinite. So there is no beginning or ending. Our kind of minds can't handle the truth of God. That's why people have all these kind of religious program God ideas that are so terribly anthropomorphic, human, right? They just mirror our own limitations. But I saw that the alchemists really, I think, had it right. I've studied alchemy for many, many years, and I have my own system of alchemy called Chek Life Process Alchemy that I teach in my advanced training programs and use in my clinical practice, and it's very, very effective. In fact, I was helped by Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner to develop it. They communicated to me from the other side, and I work with people on the other side a lot, so that's nothing new for me or my wife, Angie. But, you know, alchemy is a non-religious science of becoming conscious that what you are is really a spirit and a soul in a material body, but that the goal is to evolve your consciousness to the point where you do not need a physical form. And this is why Steiner says, for example, it's very important to engage spiritual practices, because to remain conscious after death, you have to develop a light body organ for every one of your physical organs. So you'll need a light body version of a brain and a liver and a heart, because each of those create aspects of consciousness as we know it as a human being. And so he says you will no more have spiritual eyes in the spiritual dimension without spiritual practice than a fetus would have eyes in its mother's womb without a physical reality to create physical eyes. And so what I found is that at each level of consciousness or civilization, they're at a different level of self-realization. And here we're very, very body-centric, almost to the point of narcissism. And that's what scientific materialism keeps ushering in. And that's one of the forces we have to overcome, is what Steiner calls the Ahrimanic force, the force of materialism, matter, automation, machines, technology, being controlled, turning over your agency of self to things like AI and computers and not really taking responsibility. For example, Steiner says, we will continue to develop advanced technologies outside of ourselves until we either destroy the world or realize everything we've created outside of ourselves is an inferior copy of what's inside of ourselves. The question is, what will come first? Self-realization or world destruction?
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast.
So we are here in Earth School where we have to face these polarizations, such as evil and such as the Ahrimanic force and the Luciferic force. And that's a growth stimulus. It creates enough pain that we can't be passive. We have to sort of wake up and say, okay, do I want to keep living this way? Do I always want to be unhealthy? Do I always want to have broken marriages and screwed up business partnerships and money struggles all the time and addictions and all the stuff that traps people? But those are actually the growth stimulus. Without that, everybody would just be eating donuts and drinking beer and watching television, and nobody would grow. So ultimately what I'm saying is the alchemist's conception was that through the stages of alchemy, which would be more to explain than you'd probably want me to do in this podcast, we're actually evolving and developing the awareness of what the soul is and what the spirit is. And so then things like astral travel become more natural, and then remote viewing becomes more natural, and out-of-body experiences become more natural. I remember the first time I had an out-of-body experience, it scared the hell out of me, but my first thought, I was only 12, I found myself floating above my body, looking down at my body, and I could see I'd just fallen asleep, and I went, wow, that's interesting, I'm looking at myself sleeping, how is that possible? Then I all of a sudden got scared, and I came back into my body like a lightning bolt, And it was like when someone gets hit with the paddles to jumpstart your heart, how their body will jump. I jumped and I literally felt my spirit coming back into my body. When I was out of the body, the biological body was just idling, kind of like a car just sitting there at idle. And I sat there and went, oh my God, what just happened? And then I realized if I could do it once, I could do it again. So I just held my intention. And by this time, I'd been practicing meditation with the monks and at home every day. And so I just calmed my mind and just held the intention to be out of my body. And sure enough, I literally could feel and see a light copy of myself, made of light, come right up out of my body. And then I'm looking at myself again. And my next question was, I wonder if I can get through the wall. And so I just held the intention to go through the wall. I went through the wall like it wasn't even there. Then I said, wow, this is wild. So over time, I started thinking, well, let me go look around. You know, I was raised on a 142-acre farm, so it's a big piece of property. And so I'd go looking around, and my dad would leave tools and stuff everywhere. He had a bad habit of doing that. So I would just go touring around looking for things. And then the first thing I'd do, and I'd get up in the morning and run out to where I thought I saw a chainsaw or a fence post hole digger or, where the tractor was left or whatever. And every time it was there. And I'm like, and I had no knowledge that stuff was there because there's too much going on a farm that big to know everything. And so I convinced myself early, like, wow, we are not our physical bodies. We are using them like we get into a car and drive it. And so once I started studying and practicing alchemy, I already had all the experiences that the alchemists were actually pointing to and giving meditations to get to. And I practiced a lot, many of their meditations. And so what I'm saying is that we are in an earth school, and ultimately here we're very, very caught in a materialistic conception because most of the souls on earth are actually very immature souls. They're souls that haven't been around enough lifetimes to sort of wake up to the fact that the body's like a cocoon. And just as a butterfly comes out of a cocoon, the caterpillar completely dissolves, the imaginal cells take over, and it turns to absolute liquid, and then it grows into a butterfly and flies out, and it has to break out of the cocoon. So the body's really a spiritual cocoon where we go through enough experiences to reach enough awakening to activate our imaginal cells and start using the power of our mind and our imagination, which is inherent in God because God's dreaming this whole thing into existence. And then we realize that we are free. I can go to the sun as fast as I can sit, calm myself, center my mind, and hold my intention on being there, and it's 93 million miles away, So you realize that you can't do remote viewing unless you're one with the whole universe. It's impossible. There's no other way it could work. And so this is my way of saying that Earth is actually a place for generally not very evolved souls like kindergarten, kids that are still learning to walk and run spiritually and how to get along with each other. And the reason the world's so materialistic from that spiritual perspective is because matter is spirit moving slowly enough that you can interact with it. So it's very entangled. So consciousness is very crystallized here. And if we weren't in a very rigid material construct, then if we, for example, were in a more subtle world, then the power of the technologies could be more destructive because we would be building technologies that are, shall we say, commiserate with the dimension that we're in. But if we don't have the experience of being in matter, see, here, if you try to take over the world with army tanks and helicopters, it takes a million men, and it's hard for them to get away with it with other people finding. So matter slows everything down. We've had atomic bombs in Hiroshima, and it can't do that much damage because it's very hard to split an atom. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to split even one atom. So we're kind of in a material cocoon And the higher beings know that we're potentially very destructive because we're like kids that throw toys against walls and, kick the dog and cut flowers off and chop shit up because they just don't know any better. And so as we grow up spiritually, not only do we require less and less physical form, but we have more and more freedom. And we realize at each step of the way that the key limiting factor is our own mind. We've got to learn to use our mind. And the greatest factor is getting from head orientation into heart orientation, which is why spiritually they say the longest journey you'll ever take is from your head to your heart. It's only about a foot, but it can take you 100 lifetimes to get there. And that really Spirit Gym is oriented around the journey from the head to the heart and getting clear on all the things to be authentic about who you are, what your dream for your life is, and what your values are, and what your story is, your myth is, and what your role is, and how you're going to co-create with other people to not only grow yourself spiritually, but to be a good example to the rest of the world and to be a living example so others can emulate that. And so, that was my response when the COVID lockdowns happened. I realized we were in a third world war and it was a psyop and people were very unprepared. I used to be a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, so I have elite soldier training and I went through military strategy training and I could see what was being used against humanity easily, but most people were completely blind. And I knew that I'd been researching Spirit Gym for 10 years. All these notebooks right here, there's 13 of them. They're full of notes from all my studies for years since I developed the concept of Spirit Gym. And then I just realized I had to get it out. And fortunately, the universe provided an angel for me. One of my clients who came to me going through a midlife crisis, who's very wealthy, after 2 years of working with me to get her through her midlife crisis, she just happened to say to me one day, just after we had finished her myth, and she was in tears because she for the first time in her life realized who she was. She said, "Paul, is this the kind of stuff you're going to put in Spirit Gym?" I said, "You've just done 2 years of Spirit Gym training." And she said, "Paul, this is so absolutely important to get out to the world right now. Why are you not doing it?" I said, "I can give you about 400,000 reasons why. I want it to be really nicely done. I don't want a cheesy program. I want books that are beautiful, well done. I want a highly skilled artist on the job. And I need to do this right." And she said, "Paul, you just write up whatever you think's fair and I will give you the money." And that's how Spirit Gym got born. The angel arrived.
Such a gift. So amazing. There's something you mentioned there, like the key limiting factor actually is our mind. You mentioned the journey of the head to the heart.
Yeah.
And your cross communications with Carl Jung on the other side. I think not everybody knows that Carl Jung actually a bit of an alchemist.
Oh my God, Carl Jung was the first one to decode alchemy and show that it was actually a system of spiritual evolution. There's two classes of alchemy. Chemistry, what we call chemistry, was born from alchemy. But what Carl Jung showed, and what he did, is his assistant, Marie-Louise von Franz, who worked with him for many, many years, had, I believe, multiple degrees in ancient languages. And so he would get all these ancient alchemical texts. Carl Jung's wife was very, very wealthy. Her family was one of the richest families in Sweden. And so he had the resources and the money to get his hands on things. And so he got all these ancient alchemical texts. And Marie-Louise von Franz translated them for him. And he spent years looking through all this art. And Carl Jung's actually the inventor of art therapy as we know it today. I don't know if you've ever seen the Red Book, but Carl Jung was a wildly good artist as well. And so Jung actually decoded all the symbolism. And one of the things that he showed is that the alchemists realized when they were doing various chemical experiments that For example, if they were in a bad mood, it would change the outcome of the experiment. But if they were in a good mood, the whole chemical reactions would change. And so they realized that their psyche was being mirrored back by material form, by water and by chemical concoctions. And so they realized, oh my God, I am affecting everything around me. And so that was the development of spiritual alchemy, which was really the Christian church went after these guys like gangbusters and burned them at the stake and killed them. And they didn't want anybody to know you could get enlightened through these processes without putting money in the church. And that's why alchemical books are coated with all these strange pictures with green dragons and, lions and snakes with wings and peacocks, because they had to hide everything from the church. And only the alchemists in a given group knew what these pictures and codes meant. So Carl Jung was the first one to crack the code, because this is like, you're talking about, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century stuff. And in further back, alchemy goes back all the way to Thoth, the emerald tablets. That's alchemy. In fact, one of the best books to read is Billy Carson's book on the emerald tablets. It's fantastic. So Jung really, pioneered the concept of alchemy as a spiritual developmental process. Not that he invented it. He uncovered what they were really doing and why the church was constantly killing these people. And then, if you study the collected works of Jung, there's piles of stuff on alchemy in there. I've been studying it for over 30 years. It's thousands and thousands of pages, and it's very, very deep. And I've been studying Steiner too, and Steiner has a lot of alchemy in his system, and I've studied many different systems of alchemy. I actually put my system of alchemy together by studying systems from all over the world and looking for what the correlations are and what the contrasts were. And that's ultimately what led me to speaking to Jung and Steiner about it, because I said, look, I'm trying to create the system of alchemy that works physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, but there's all these contradictions, and I don't know how to resolve them. So it was interesting because I was doing this meditation to connect to my spirit guides that actually was put out by Alex Gray, the famous artist. And I'm actually doing this in my sauna, and it's a guided meditation on a CD where you meet your spirit guides. This is many, many years ago, but this is right when I was doing all this work with alchemy. And the first person to show up was, actually it was Rudolf Steiner. And I recognized him immediately because I've been studying for years. And I was shocked that it was Rudolf Steiner that showed up. And he handed me a scroll. And he said, this will help you resolve the challenges you have building your system of alchemy. And so when I opened this scroll, there's two layers to my system, the external and the internal. So the physical world and the internal spiritual world. And so he had created the external systems that I'd been working on, except he'd corrected some of the positions of where the elements went and things like that. And he said, hang on to that scroll, because the next person coming to visit you is going to give you something else. And then Carl Jung came to me and he handed me his scroll and he said, Paul, this will help you resolve your challenges with the alchemy system you've been putting together. And they both were aware that I'd been doing this because I was studying their work for years and meditating on this. And then Jung says, now put this scroll on top of the one Steiner gave you. And they were made of this very thin parchment paper. And so when I laid Jung's scroll over top of Steiner's, it fit like a key into a lock. And the inner aspects of it was all the psychological and spiritual elements, and the outer was everything to do with the physical body, and it showed how the mind and the emotions interfaced with the body and how spirit moved through all these systems. And I put this system together and it works beautifully, and I've helped countless people heal with it and get right to the core of their problem in no time. It blows my students away. And in fact, I was working with Ben Greenfield years ago, and he was having some challenges. And so I said, well, why don't you let me show you what happens when we do this through my alchemy system? And it took me only about 15 minutes to pin the tail on the donkey, and it blew his mind. So I gave him practices to do, and he went off and did them and had quite an opening. It was pretty powerful. And so, when people tell me I'm crazy and like all this spiritual dimension, so I say, well, how do you account for the fact that I keep going and meeting with people that give me stuff that I bring back here and it works beautifully? And my education system, I've been doing this for my whole career. It's full of all these insights. And sometimes they're saying, oh, you just need to read such and such a book. I have 5,000 books right over there. I've got $500,000 of the books I've been collecting for 40 years. And so I oftentimes have information in my library that I don't even remember. And some of these beings that I'm talking to will say, oh, you got a book on that in your library. Here, let me show you where it's at. And I go in my library and the answers to my questions are right there. Like, okay, so when people tell me I'm crazy and this is all bullshit, I'm like, okay, well, you need to hang around and watch what happens around here for a while, because there's no friggin' way I could have put this stuff together. I'm not smart enough to do this by myself. And so, I have so much experience with these types of events now that it's as normal for me as breath to talk to people on the other side or see ghosts or astral. That's like who I am and the way I live. So, by the time I was starting to talk to people about this stuff in public, I had many, many years of experience working in these dimensions and things like that. So for me, it was just, like asking me, how do I eat or how do I live? And that's why I get up early in the morning, because I have to do that work in dead quiet, and I can't have kids around and phones ringing and people after me to sign this document or whatever, or film this or film that. So it takes a lot of discipline, but it's also so damn exciting. Like I'm like a little kid every day. Like I can't wait to get in here and fire up the vaporizer and make myself a real good espresso and then get into my prayers and my meditations and my studies. And, without that, the world would be so flat I wouldn't want to be here anymore. When I went through a midlife crisis at 50, I just burnt out on dealing with people's problems all the time and all the kind of the mundanities of life. And so I spent 3 years doing, minimizing my work and just doing just enough to pay the bills and doing a lot of work with plant medicines and deep journeys and art. And I painted a tremendous amount and built my own system of art therapy based on studying systems from all over the world, including Jung's. So after 3 years of that, I finally became interested in helping people again. I needed to help myself for a while. And so I'm 63 now, so I've been at it for a long time. I became the trainer of the Army boxing team January 1984. So I started lecturing professionally in 1988. I've given thousands and thousands of lectures all over the world. Penny and I spent 25 years making it around the world, twice a year, every year, doing countless lectures and Chek training programs all over the world. So, I've been doing this a long time is what I'm saying, and I have studied a lot of things and penetrated a lot of veils that most people think are illusions, but, I tell people opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one and most of them stink because they're not based on experience. They're just based on judgment. This is why I love David Bohm saying real thinking is hard work. That's why most people just rearrange their prejudices and call it thinking. And I'm like, amen to that.
Whoa, we inspired souls, lumen beings, join in on the conversation in the comments below. What are you taking away from today's incredibly rich podcast with Paul Chek? I'd love to hear from you. Some of the insights from the Black Madonna, just, oh my God, there is so much in here. What I'm taking away is really this multi-dimensional nature of us all and how it all is like spiritual wellness. It's against all degrees of our being. My goodness, touch wood, this is such a profound episode for me anyway. I hope you guys are having a similar experience. Leave those comments below and I'd join in on the conversation. And if you do have questions of Paul, he'll likely be back again in the future. Leave those in the comments below. I'm sure questions are opening up for you. Leave those questions in the comments below and I'd be honored to ask them on your behalf. You mentioned earlier that here on Earth we're kind of in this almost kindergarten kind of state. I think I've watched in other interviews where like collectively you said we're in almost like a spiritual puberty, and that potentially, well, my question was going to be, there's a few folds to the question. Do you see a rite of passage coming forward for humanity?
Coming forward? Where have you been? What do you think COVID right? is?
And also,
what do you think's going on in the world right now? Look around.
And also, like, because there's like the kind of conversation you and I are having around alchemy even would have been taboo not so long ago, right?
Probably,
and yet it seems like these kind of wisdoms are really being like soaked up into the zeitgeist. They're coming to the fore now.
Yeah.
Do you think we're ready for something? Do you think we're going to break through? And do you think it's going to break down?
If we don't have that kind of information, what have we got? Right? It's like people that keep taking drugs to cure cancer instead of looking at what they're doing to give themselves cancer. Right? So the what used to be esoteric secret teachings are now everywhere. Anybody can get their hands on them. And it's because beings in higher dimensions are releasing this knowledge, and we are in a legitimate rite of passage. We're in a spiritual transition from childhood to adulthood. But in a real, in any rite of passage, people die. I mean, it's a real thing. It's like a firewalk. You can get badly burned in a firewalk. I've done it. I used to be Tony Robbins' therapist. He's a friend of mine for many years. I've done his firewalk, and I watched a lot of people lose focus and burn the bottoms on their feet real bad. There was 6 ambulances there, very, very busy because people could not hold their focus. And so this is why you're seeing people like Billy Carson, Greg Braden, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Eckhart Tolle, even Deepak Chopra was ushering in a lot of this more advanced knowledge. I mean, there's Jack Korn. I mean, there's so many of them, right? But they just don't get much airtime because they've got too many idiots on television and on the media. But for those that are ready, they gravitate toward them and they find them. And it's just like my own education system went from muscleheads and ass kickers to highly spiritually. Like now my student base is full of some of the most mind-blowingly beautiful, evolved people that if I would have known these people were coming to work with me 20 years ago, it made my whole life easier knowing the trajectory that it was going to take. So we have to face our shadow collectively. We've got to face everything we've denied. We've got to face the falsities of what I call corporate religion and brainwashing and believing. And we've got to learn how to think for ourselves and problem solve for ourselves and how to ask bigger, deeper questions so that we can actually get out of the mirror and into reality, meaning stop thinking that what you see in the mirror is all you are. And so Steiner describes, as do many others, how and Ra in the Law of One talks about cycles where we go through harvest periods where there's calamities in the world, wars and destruction, and that it pulls souls out of Earth School so that the next batch of souls can come in. There's often a period of destruction, such as a great flood, followed by a period of regeneration and then re-civilization. And you see this, if you study the history of the pyramids and the Sphinx and, ancient cities like Göbekli Tepe and all these other things, it's obvious to anyone paying attention that humanity's been on this planet for a lot longer than the Bible would say, 6,000 years, my God. I mean, it's a long story I could get into, but if you study this stuff honestly, I was listening to an anthropologist interview with Jeffrey Mishlove on the New Thinking Aloud, and he said there's hard evidence that there was human beings just like us on this planet 200 million years ago, and that everything we're being taught in university is just a cooked up story And he's like, we got skeletons that have been dated to 200 million years ago. And there's so much of this evidence that they have to keep hiding it, And Greg Braden, in his show Missing Links on Gaia, goes through tons of this stuff. Like, for example, Greg Braden shows coal miners that were like over a mile down in the earth in coal that was dated 2 million years of age, were chipping away, and all of a sudden saw something sticking out of the coal, and it turned out to be a computer chip that was made of silicone. And it's in coal that's like 2+ million years old. And there's many, many of these types of things, but they don't ever let it get out into the public. But, Greg Braden put a whole series together called Missing Links, where he goes through one after the other of these things. And some of this stuff he brings up, and some of the stuff they have in museums that they don't ever let the public see, like Smithsonian and these major museums, they keep this all stuff secret. And, the list of so long. Then you got books like The World's 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves, showing the man that we think of as Jesus Christ was by no means the only ever Savior that rose from the dead. There's been 16 of them. And, there's so much. People actually our education system is so, all right, here's how bad our education system. We have people going to universities to this very day, getting master's degrees for believing that the Egyptian pyramids were built by rolling 10 to 100 ton blocks of stone, 45 degrees angle, 400 feet, 40 feet in the air, up rollers of wood. I'm like, I work with stone, and you don't roll 10-ton blocks of stone on wood. It'll crush it like you walking on a foam roller. The absolute childish stupidity of somebody that would spend that many years in university believing shit like that shows you how completely and utterly brainwashed people are, and how they just don't think for themselves, and they'll believe anything to get a degree instead of questioning and challenging it. And when you do question and challenge, you get pushed to the back or ignored or kicked out. But that's part of Earth School. We have to have this resistance in order to strengthen our spirit and to come out of the child archetype into the warrior archetype, where we're willing to investigate and tell the truth even if it gets us killed. And that's what it means to be a warrior. That's what it means to be an adult, to stand up for what you believe in, and to have values that you're willing to die for, to know who your people are and what is sacred enough for you to die for it. And we're in a transition state right now where we've got to stop letting all the churches and all the governments and all the big daddies in the sky tell us what to do, and start thinking for ourselves and creating for ourselves, and creating free energy and banking systems and money systems, or we're always going to be in this little prison. And that's what Spirit Gym is. It's where you go to meet the resistance that you have to meet to grow yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And the whole universe is a Spirit Gym. It's all God figuring itself out.
I think at this juncture in the conversation, it'd be remiss of me to not bring up the pain teacher, which is such a part of your work that, is often visited in conversation. One of the things that's also present for me at this particular juncture in the conversation is, your mother had this, yogi aspect to her, and, your grandfather was a Cherokee, and there just seems to be like
he wasn't, just so you know.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Strangely enough, my sister spent years doing research, genetic research through 23andMe and another one. And it turns out that was just a story we were told. When we got our genetics back, I have all sorts of stuff in me, from like 8% Anasazi Jew to a lot of French. But I had like 8 or 9 different bloodlines in me. But it turned out that half my family wasn't who they said they were. It was the craziest thing. Like, my grandfather's not my grandfather, and there was all this weird stuff going on, and it was just the craziest thing. Like, it's like half my family was living an alias. And so, the neat thing is, though, is because I was told that story as a child, it really got me to really look into Native American cultures, and I studied them quite extensively. I probably got 100 books on different cultures around the world, and it was almost like Spirit set me up to have that myth, to give me a reason to look into ancient wisdom, because it ultimately became the foundation of my teachings. Really, my teachings are built on timeless truths. That's why my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, which just had the 20-year special edition come out, I haven't had to hardly change anything in it, because it's all based on timeless truths. You got to eat good food. You got to take care of the soil. You got to move your body, So I remember years ago, I did a podcast. Sorry, I'm still getting over this crazy COVID thing that I'm having to deal with. Vaccine shedding is real. The first time I did a podcast with Ben Greenfield, he says, a lot of people say that your book's outdated. And I said, you've got the book, go get it and open it to any page. And if you can find anything in there that's outdated, I'll kiss your ass on the highest table of the busiest restaurant in town. I said, when people say my book's outdated, what they're saying is I'm too lazy to do these things, and I want to be told all I got to do is take a pill or a hormone or use a red light, and my whole life will be better. And that's always been the challenge of my teachings, is that they require legitimate participation from you, the patient, or you, the student. And there are certain things you cannot escape, like the responsibility of having clear awareness of what's happy making for you and taking the responsibility to do it. Moving your body enough to keep it healthy, to be healthy to begin with, but then to live the dream you have. I mean, if you want to be a mountain climber, you got to have a higher level of fitness than someone just wants to play with their grandkids. You have to take care of the soil. You got to take care of the ecosystem, because that's what feeds you. And you've got to have time for introspection, and you got to give yourself enough rest to recover, regenerate. And if you don't introspect and self-reflect, you'll never grow spiritually. So you'll always just be the same person in an older body every day, doing the same silly shit and making the same complaints and thinking it's all the world doing it to you. And that's my 4-doctor system: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Quiet. There's no way to escape that. And then there's 6 foundation principles, 3 of them feminine and 3 of them masculine: nutrition, hydration, and sleep, feminine; breathing, thinking, and movement, particularly masculine. And if you don't understand those principles, you're going to be somebody's patient for the rest of your life, and it's going to cost you probably all the money you've got. And isn't it interesting that the number 1 cause of bankruptcy worldwide is medical expenses? More people go bankrupt because they spend all their life savings and their kids' college funds trying to heal cancer and diseases than anything else. I researched this for a podcast I did maybe a year and a half ago, and it blew my mind. I mean, you would think it would be, childish spending and overdoing credit cards, but it wasn't. By far, the number 1 cause of bankruptcy is medical expenses. It's putting more people out of financial stability than anything in the world, because they keep running to people for pills instead of taking care of themselves and taking care of the environment.
I think that once again highlights what you were saying earlier about the lack of maturity in some sense to sort of do something proactively, sort of maintain and look after.
Part of it is the education system just brainwashes you into everything they want you to keep doing and the way they want you to keep spending and living. That's why, I left school in the 9th grade. I'm like, I can't get my questions answered here. I get in trouble for asking questions. I couldn't get my questions answered in a Christian church. It was only the monks and self-realization fellowship temples that answered my questions with good answers. And so I educated myself. I just traveled around the world, looked for the best experts and asked them the toughest questions I could, kept good notes, went back to the clinic and practiced it and refined and refined and refined. But I found if you want to learn, you got to go to the people that have developed a level of mastery, but most university professors don't actually have much experience at all at doing what they're teaching. I've seen many university professors, they're PhDs in biomechanics, but they don't even know how to lift weights. They don't know how the body works. They just use stick figures on computers, and I've pinned them to the table many times in debates and just completely destroyed their arguments right in front of the hundreds of people.
Paul, you've been dedicated to human optimization and holistic health and wellness for such a long time. Is it a natural byproduct of being like so invested in this work that some of this clairaudience, clairvoyance, remote viewing stuff opens up? Like, is it something that's accessible to most people? Or do you think it was just something about your particular soul life path that it's opened and popped open for you?
Everyone has these gifts. Each of us, I know for sure from working with so many students and teaching spiritual-based workshops for so long, every one of us has an innate gift. Some are more inherently visual inside. Some are more capable of inner listening or clairaudience. Some are more capable of sensing the supersensory. Like, many people can't see entities, but they can feel them in their presence. So that's clairsentience. Some people have a natural gift of telepathy, but they're afraid to tell people about it. But what I found is if you find out what your natural gift is and you work with it, then it starts bringing the other ones online, because one of the first things you have to do is you got to overcome your own program beliefs that this isn't possible, because we're in a society full of people that are told all the time that, you know, these things aren't real, and they get, you know, and they attack psi researchers, and even the greatest, you know, psi researchers, do some of the best research in the world because they have so much scrutiny. They have to put together really good studies. But if you look at Dean Radin's work and Charles Tart's work and Jeffrey Mishlov's work and Gary Schwartz's work and a long list of these guys, they're show beyond a shadow of doubt. The whole Ions Institute, which was started by Edgar Mitchell. In fact, I won a remote viewing contest in the year 2000 at the Field Conference in London. The director of the CIA's remote viewing program at the time put a one-day course in remote viewing. There were 750 people that showed up. It was taught in a big auditorium, and Edgar Mitchell was there. But when Edgar Mitchell retired from being an astronaut, he put all his money into the creation of the Ions Institute for the study of consciousness. So there's full of excellent scientists doing great research, and I'm part of all these groups. The Scientific Medical Network out of England is another one. I just recently interviewed one of their top guys, David Lorimer. So we all have these abilities, but there's very few people around teaching us how to develop them, and it's not often safe to even tell your own family that you have these abilities, because they'll think you're a nutcase. I didn't tell my parents or my brothers and sisters I was having these out-of-body experiences, because I thought for sure I'd probably end up either getting belittled or taken to a doctor to see if I had lost my mind. But when I started working with Master Fong Ha, by the time I'd done my third gong, which is a 100-day consecutive practice, he had given me different types of practices. And then by the time I'd done my third gong, my clairvoyance was just wickedly powerful. It was intensely powerful. It was stressful too, because I could see so much inside of everybody, their aura. I could see their traumas, their pains, their oftentimes history, sometimes past life histories. And I could just see how many people were so in pain and so lost and scared, and I just felt overwhelmed. So I had to ask my soul to only show me what I was supposed to see if I was meant to interact with somebody. But through my practices over the years, I've developed all the voyances. I have them all now. But it took, years of Tai Chi and really calming and centering and meditation. And I did a year of Egyptian sun gazing. My soul had me become a vegetarian for a year, where I did a lot of advanced spiritual practices that I was guided to by my soul, and various other things that I did. But I think once you really commit yourself to heart-centered development with the intention of not only learning the truth of yourself, but doing the best you can do to support other people in their own health and evolution, that the universe responds by opening you up to the degree that you express, shall we say, spiritual maturity, and you're not just doing this shit for party tricks and trying to get attention and being a child with CDs, powers. So I think because I've really devoted myself to helping people, you could say that my own soul has unlocked these abilities as I've done the work to demonstrate the commitment to the practices that ultimately have the ability to open these things up. But I don't use them for any other reason than my own spiritual research and to help people. People all walk up to me all the time and ask me to read their auras and tell them what's going to happen in the future, and I won't do it because the few times that I did do it, it caused such a storm of people just following me everywhere, wanting me to do that. It drove me crazy. And I realized that, that's not what I'm here to do. So I reserve that for my patients and people that that really need my help. And there's plenty of them out there that know damn well that I have these abilities because I hit the bullseye over and over again, It's not anything magical. It's just I develop the abilities just like you develop the ability to lift weights or run faster or jump higher or be better at math or anything. It's just there's skills. You got to work on them. But most people are too damn lazy and undisciplined to, do the work. And you can go for, there's been periods where, where I went for over a year without feeling like anything was happening and just had to have the discipline to keep going. Then all of a sudden it's like you have a breakthrough and something new opens up and you go, wow, I'm glad I stuck to it or I never would have made it to this experience.
Something I'd like to ask you about that if I'm not interrupting.
No, that's fine.
Is it does seem like when I'm speaking to a lot of different spiritual teachers on this podcast that there does seem to be, there's almost two paths, especially it appears now the rift is just getting brighter and stronger and stronger. And we were talking about the rite of passage earlier, in terms of being in service to oneself versus being in service to others. And part of me does really wonder, despite what you're saying, and I don't want to, but despite what you're saying, even before when you were talking about, hey, psychedelic research, going along into these potentially breaking points in order to be better to serve others.
Yeah.
It does seem like you've potentially, I don't know, my brain couldn't help but go to this place where it's like potentially you've been endowed with said, I'll use gifts loosely, but gifts, because of that spiritual current of service to others is something that just seems to drive you exponentially.
I'll tell you, I was a competitive boxer and kickboxer and motocross racer when I was young, and I was a very successful athlete. I broke many, many records in the military, and I set 2 records in the obstacle course, sometimes called the confidence course, without listing all the records. But I really pushed myself to develop myself because I really wanted to see what I was capable of, and athletics was a natural outlet for me. And I needed athletics as a kid because my stepfather was a very, very violent, dangerous man and scary to be around and hurt us a lot. And so I had to kind of develop a sixth sense about where he was and what he was doing because he could really hurt you. And so I had to have a way of letting out all my anger and my sadness and disappointment for the loss of my father. My father drowned when I was 8. And I fought on the Army boxing team, which is when I was there, we were the 3rd-ranked amateur boxing team in the world. We'd only been beaten by Cuba and Russia. They were the only 2 teams that could beat us. And that's hardcore. I represented the Army in triathlon. At the same time, I was a fighter on the boxing team, which was unheard of. And I won the Army triathlon and was the Army's representative at the national championships in 1986 at Hilton Head for the USTS national championships. And that's why they made me the trainer. They're like, how in the world can you train with us, win boxing matches, and train for triathlons and win triathlons? I was a top 10 overall finisher 6 times. As an amateur, I was finished top 10, including the pros.
Both pools are filled with people that are in the Army as well, so quite fit, quite regimented, quite disciplined as well. The other people that you know.
Mm-hmm. And so when they gave me the job as the trainer, because what happened is my company commander said, Paul, if you want to stop boxing and train full-time for the Army triathlon, I'm going to bet a lot of money on you, but I need you to make sure you win. You know, and because company commanders and generals do this shit all the time. You know, they got their superheroes and they're always competing, my guy against your guy. And so my company commander, you know, saw me breaking all these records and setting records, and I got my guy now. And he knew I was fighting full-time on the boxing team, so he said, look, if you want to train full-time for triathlon, I'll let you stop fighting on the boxing team, and that's all your job's going to be, but you got to win, period. And so I went back to the boxing team, and I knew I wasn't going to become a pro fighter because my fighting style was too aggressive. And I already see guys on the boxing team at 19 years of age that were punch drunk and brain damaged, and I just didn't want that to be my future, you know. Lots of guys on the boxing team had over 300 fights by the time they were 20, you know. Evander Holyfield used to train with us. James Bone Crusher Smith, I was his therapist for a long time. I was working with James Bone Crusher Smith when he went the distance with Mike Tyson. He was the first one to go the distance with Mike Tyson. And, you know, so I've worked with a lot of the best fighters in the world, but I told the coaches, hey, I'm going to leave the boxing team and I'm going to train full-time for triathlon. And they said, oh my God, don't do that. How about if we let you become the trainer and you take over nutrition, you train the fighters, and you manage the gym, and anytime you can do whatever you want. If you want to train for triathlons, whatever. So that's what happened. And that was I became trainer in January 84. As a side note, in the 88 Olympics, of the 12 boxers on the Olympic boxing team, 11 of them came from my boxing team. And they all had to fight their way through the Olympic trials. 11 of the men on the U.S. Olympic boxing team were on one of the boxing teams that I coached, that I trained, which has never been done before. And so the story is this. Once I became the trainer of the Army boxing team, I implemented the first massage therapy program in the Army as well. I'd been reading books on sports massage, and I was in so much discomfort, I used to just beg my first wife to just do anything she could to massage me. And a buddy of mine worked at DuPont Chemical, and for $50 he had the carpenters there build me a massage table. And my grandmother used to massage me when I was a kid, and I had asthma, and she was the only one that could help me. And I think I embodied my grandmother's touch. And so I just had this innate sense of what to do with people, and I studied sports massage books and just sort of learned by practicing. And the injury levels on the boxing team went way down. The performance went way up. When they hired me, they said, you know, we need you to strengthen these guys up because we have a lot of problems. A lot of these guys are good fighters, but they can't knock anybody out, and you knock people out all the time. So, you know, I grew up swinging an axe for 8 hours a day and digging fence post holes and bucking hay for 8 hours straight for days in a row. And my father was a literal slave driver and a total frickin' alpha male badass. You don't want to mess with my stepdad. He was a 220-pound, 6'4" professional rodeo rider, and he'd fucking kick your ass in a moment's notice for anything, and anyone's ass, man or animal. And so I was raised in this kind of very intense pressure cooker environment. So for me, the military was like a cakewalk. I used to tell these guys, you guys wouldn't fucking last a day with my dad on the farm. He'd kill all of you. You think you're badass soldiers, you're pussies. And so when I became the trainer and I was helping people and they were getting great results, and I was changing their diet, and I designed completely different exercise programs. I implemented weightlifting and massage therapy and stretching and all the things that I had studied to be the best athlete I could be. I spent time reading books on everything. I wanted to win at any fucking cost, man. So I studied everything I could study and practiced and had to heal myself from a lot of really bad injuries. I got really bad injuries racing motocross. I got 6 really bad concussions, lots of broken bones. I broke my leg in 5 places, cliff diving. I got trampled in the rodeo when I was a kid. I rode in the rodeo and got trampled. So I've had a lot of bad injuries, and I had to kind of nurse myself through it, and I learned a lot from it. But the punchline I'm driving at, Amrit, is it wasn't until I became the trainer and I was helping people really perform better, feel better, and live their dreams that it was the first time in my life that I felt whole. I actually got a lot more joy out of helping other people win boxing matches and kickboxing. I was also a competitive kickboxer. I got a lot of joy out of helping them perform better, because any night I could contribute to 10 guys winning in a tournament, but by myself I could only beat one guy. And it was when I knew that I had found my life path, because it was the only thing that gave me so much joy that I could study it endlessly and never get bored. And I found people interesting, and it filled my heart. It was the first time that my heart filled up. And I never turned back, right? That January 84 is a long time ago. Prior to that, I taught aerobics and did all sorts of different things, but ultimately, I feel the most alive when I'm helping other people live their dreams and heal and grow and understand who they really are and why we're all here. And I'm 63 and I study as much as I did in my 20s. I've read thousands of books. I've traveled the world for many, many years, paying the best experts lots of money, and I got to the point where my reputation was well known enough that a lot of them, when I would contact them, would say, "Oh shit, I've heard all about you. Hell, I'll do a day with you for free if you do a day with me for free." And so we would just trade, and I would be with some of the greatest therapists and doctors in the world, just cross-pollinating each other. And I built the entire institute as a multidisciplinary institute because I realized nobody has enough knowledge to deal with a human being. So I put together a very comprehensive system of analysis so that you can decide, what are the indications of the need for a neurologist or a chiropractor or an osteopath or an acupuncturist or a craniosacral therapist or a Feldenkrais practitioner or an Alexander practitioner or an endocrinologist. So I built the whole system so that there's medical doctors in the same class with nurses and chiropractors and osteopaths and strength coaches and personal trainers, and someone that was a truck driver 2 weeks ago that decided to change profession. So the system's complete. I got all the anatomy, all the physiology, everything you need. It takes 5 years to go through the Chek Academy, but you'll be the most skilled holistic professional in the world. One of my students is a physiatrist at the Mayo Clinic who went through my training. There's Nathan Riley's a famous OBGYN, great podcast, best OBGYN. He's our family. He delivered my daughter. He went through my whole training program, and I helped him develop a holistic system, and he's extremely successful now. He's one of the smartest doctors I've ever met in my life. So for me, my heart is sustained by helping other people find their dream, live their dream, understand what it takes to be healthy, learn what a spiritual practice is, why it's important, how to do it, and how to grow physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Not just, put more muscle on or lift more weight or, how big is your bench press, how big is your dick, all that kind of stupid shit that is so common in gyms and sports teams. But if you study raw, you can evolve on this service to self path, but you can only make it to the 6th dimension before you have to switch to service to other. It's the end of the road, So that's a sort of a summary.
Yeah. Thank you so much for breaking that down. It just, as you mentioned, the delivery of your daughter, I couldn't help but remember
my son.
There was sorry.
Oh, Nathan delivered my daughter. I have 3 kids. Paul Jr.'s 45. Mana's going to be 9 in February, and Zoe's 5.
Yeah, I think there's a moment where but it's interesting. Maybe it was telepathic just then. I was thinking of your son because he was in the hospital when I think it was your daughter was going to get vaccinated, and he asked some questions and no one could give him the right answers. Do you remember this story?
Well, they tried to vaccinate all my kids, and I wouldn't let them vaccinate any. In fact, they called the social services in and almost took our kids away because they were threatening that I was being abusive to my wife and my children because I wouldn't let them vaccinate my kids, and neither would Angie, but they created this own little story, and they actually almost took my kids away. And it was the second birth, Zoe, when Nathan Riley was our doctor, and I immediately, shared my values with him, and he said, I'm 100% with you, and he protected me from all that. He said, do not bother these people about vaccinations. They've made their choice. You must not bother them. The first time they literally they made the social services come in and interview my wife for over an hour to determine if they were going to take our kids away. And Nathan Riley protected us. And I met with him after that and said, look, you're the best OBGYN I've ever met in my life, and you're one of the smartest doctors. In fact, this guy came into the room, in the hospital room when Angie was there, and because she was going into labor, and we brought our biogeometry cubes, we brought orgone-generating pyramids, we brought our own food, we brought our own water. And he walked into the room and he's like, wow, this room doesn't feel like any room in the whole hospital. What the hell's going on in here? And so I started educating him on all this. So he went on his own, looked me up, found my podcast, found my institute. And then he came back and goes, my God, I had no idea who the hell you were. And so we became friends. And I said, look, you need to get out of the hospital system, man. We need people like you out in the world teaching real health and real prenatal preparation and midwifing and all that. And he did. He did it. And now he's making way more money than he ever did in the hospital system and helping thousands of people all over the world.
Well, when we're tuning into Spirit Jim and your work, I think it's natural because of literally I said, I meant this when I said this, you take holistic to its truest multidimensional nth degree in many ways, touch wood, which...
the word whole means whole, right?
Yeah.
The whole enchilada, baby.
Yeah, but so many people are just so comfortable with, not going all the way. Yeah.
Well,
that's not the pole check.
There's always a price for that. Right? There's always a price for that.
And yet I think it runs the risk at this particular juncture in the conversation of appearing intimidating for the individual to approach. What would you say to someone that's intimidated by approaching Spirit Jim?
You're probably not ready for it yet. Animals can sense where there's salt out in nature, but they don't go looking for salt until their bodies need it. You don't just see cows hanging around licking salt endlessly. They get what their body needs when their body wants it. Spiritually, when people hear me talk about this stuff, the most common thing my students say when I ask, why'd you come to the Institute? They say, you're the first person I've ever heard talk about all this stuff from food to exercise to spiritual development that actually made sense to me and could answer my questions. And so when a person's got the natural instinct to follow their nose, because they sense it's the direction they're supposed to be going in, that's when they're ready for the kind of teachings I offer. But people that come just to keep up with the Joneses will never do the work to really, because ultimately, first and foremost, my system is all about you, the individual. I believe you can't give what you don't have. So though I'm teaching you how to take care of other people, I demand that you apply all this training to yourself, and you have to get tested to prove that you are doing it, or you will not progress. I do not run a multiple choice bubblegum university where you can just fake it till you make it. I got way too much awareness of the karma from doing that. I'll quote Osho, I didn't come here to train the masses, I came here to create masters. I came here to create people that really do their job well, and any one of the Chek professionals out there can affect hundreds and hundreds of people who then affect their families, who then affect their friends. And so if you want to make change, you've got to find the change makers. And so, the challenge of my system is it requires discipline, and it requires commitment, and it requires that your heart really be committed to doing your best for yourself and for the world, or you won't do the work, and you won't grow yourself. And so it's just like being an elite soldier. They have exclusion processes all the way. They work the living hell out of you, beat you up, tell you your mother's ugly and they had sex with her last night and offer you a hot shower and a fresh meal to get the hell out of here. They're forever trying to torture you into giving up, right? And so, I used to just giggle at them and say, oh, this is nothing, man, But most people are just not ready to be an elite soldier, and they're too chicken to jump out of an airplane and all the other stuff. And they're too chicken to jump into themselves and become who and what they really are. They're just not spiritually mature enough or psychologically mature enough yet. So they're too busy, faking it till they make it, or, working for money because they are too chicken to do what they love to do, and all these other excuses. And eventually they've got enough pain in their life that a guy like me starts to become attractive. Most of my students come to me with a health crisis or a psychological crisis that they couldn't get the answers to anywhere else. And so good, now you've got your internship. I'll give you the tools to figure yourself out, and you'll actually know what you're doing when you come out the other side. You'll be the wounded healer. They're my favorite types.
The archetype of the wounded healer.
Yeah.
You've described visions of the Black Madonna urging you to protect the planet.
I painted her. She's right behind me on the wall.
If someone's never experienced that kind of guiding presence.
I talked to her this morning, actually. It's funny you're asking.
What does she say? What is the guidance here? What's waiting for us to be learnt, to be
Well,
understood?
she says a lot. What would you like to know about?
Well, I'm open to the wisdom that you think she would like to impart upon us at this moment in time.
In essence, she says, you're all my children, but it's time for you to become adults now. I can no longer take the abuse you're giving me as Gaia, as Mother Earth. She says, you're all going through puberty now. You're rejecting all the natural principles and the harmony of nature that created you and sustained you. And that you're now going through a rite of passage. And you must either wake up to the truth of who and what you are and support me, or I cannot support you anymore. And if you don't make it through this rite of passage, you will be able to reincarnate, but you won't make it through this lifetime, and you will learn the truth of yourself in the afterlife and wake up to who and what you are and what the earth is for and what I devote. She's the divine mother in earth terms, right? She is the feminine of God. The Black Madonna is the anthropomorphic expression of Gaia. So archetypally, she is Gaia. Just like higher dimensional beings can manifest in any shape or form that makes you feel comfortable. They might show up as a hawk or an eagle or an avatar. But if somebody can't handle an avatar, then one of these beings might show up as somebody who just happens to be standing next to you when you're getting your dry cleaning and says the one thing that you needed to hear to change your whole life. So the Black Madonna is really the embodiment of human consciousness at its highest potential from the feminine perspective, but she carries within her all the karmic history and all the trauma of humanity and all the trauma we've done to the world in our own childish evolution. Just like, if you're an 8-year-old and you smash your neighbor's window, your mom and dad have to pay for it. If you light their house on fire and someone finds out, your mom and dad will be taxed with paying for that house because you're their responsibility. So her and Father Son are our parents. The spirit of the Son is like Mother Earth's husband, and together they create the archetype and the matrix within which souls evolve here at this level. So she provides the spirit and he provides the logos, which is the divine blueprint that we're all archetypally living. She understands, that we're all teenagers and that we're kind of lost and confused, just like, we can get lost in all these little things. We can get lost in sex and lost in money and lost in drugs. And so she knows it's just part of our own awakening, but she also knows, like all tribal elders did, you know, once kids go through puberty, they have to go through an initiation process to understand what it means to protect the tribe and to give your life for something bigger than yourself. And she tells me that it's time now, because there's too many of us on the planet, and we're being too destructive, and we're being too, our technological skills have outpaced our moral development by about 100-fold. And so she has made it clear to me that the negative entities and the beings and the people that are doing things like COVID and a lot of other stuff are here to put us to the test of standing up for what life really is and getting over all the division and realizing we're not going to get through this without holding each other's hands and returning to brotherhood and sisterhood and circling the globe to protect the planet and its resources from large corporations. You know, they're the service to self entities that Ra talks about. They're really leading the service to self charge, and those are the dark forces that always come to push us into spiritual growth. So they're as much of the plan as anybody else. I certainly don't enjoy that, but it's part of the reality. Like, a lot of people don't like going to the gym. I know, you know, one of the best boxers I ever trained in my life was a guy named Anthony Hembrick. He's the guy that missed the bus in the '88 Olympics. On the way to the championships, he missed the bus. I don't know if you remember the story, but this guy was just one of the most amazing, frickin' talented fighters I ever met in my life. I mean, he was like Sugar Ray Leonard right in front of you as a middleweight. I mean, he was hardly, the guy rarely ever lost a fight. I don't know what his record was, like, 320-2 or something crazy. But he hated training. He was lazy as shit. And I said to him, Anthony, one day you're going to get to the Olympics and you're going to be facing a Russian or a Cuban or a Mexican whose whole life depends on getting out of that country to get freedom and having the money that comes with winning. And they're going to be just as skilled as you, but in better condition. And you're going to lose because you're lazy, right? And so my point is, we've become entrapped with technology that's made us dumb and lazy. We use gadgets to do our thinking. We use tools to do everything. We're now using AI to think for us. We've got students using AI to pass tests in university. Steiner warned that the more you use external technologies, the more you atrophy your own inner technologies. So we're actually being taken over by this Ahrimanic technological force, but it's stopping us from developing our humanity and our voyances and our spiritual skills and abilities because we're relying on external gadgets to do everything for us. But while we're growing in the ability to create these very dangerous technologies, our morality is not developing. Our sense of connection to each other is breaking down. Our sense of connection to God is breaking down. I mean, you got Yuval Noah Harari telling there's no such thing as a soul, there is no God, you're just a hackable animal, there's no value to life, there's no meaning to life. I mean, that kind of absolute horseshit people believe, and it comes with a lot of pain and a lot of existential crisis. And so you have these dark forces coming, impinging on the world. Steiner talked all about this. He warned exactly what happened, and he was right to the letter. If you haven't listened to my episode 250, Loose for Christ Ahriman, it's a 5-hour special event that I did, and it was my most listened to podcast, I think in 2022 or 2023, and I did it to wake people up to what all this stuff that was going on in the pandemic.
The different forces.
Was really about and why these are happening. And that's part of the initiation. So the Black Madonna says, look, I've done everything I can do for you. Now you have to learn to fend for yourself, and you have to get clear on what your values are. And if your values are out of harmony with life itself, you will die. And I have got to, I have to hold space for you to go through that, because the whole point of being human is to ultimately realize who and what you are. And my job is to give you the chance to be human and to have a body and to have a home. But once you start destroying your own body and your own home and the lives of other people, now you must go through the rite of passage. So here we all are. So she's telling me we're in it now, and it will continue for a few years, and we'll either annihilate each other and put the planet into a rest state for, potentially a couple of 100 years or whatever, however long it takes to recover. And Ra says the same thing. We're going through a harvest period, and a new batch of souls will come in, and the whole Earth school will start over again. And the Hopi prophecies are telling you about the same thing too. The Hopi drew a diagram on a big rock, and it shows a trail going around the rock, and it goes a long ways, which is the history of humanity. Then it gets to a bifurcation point. The top line keeps going, then it comes to a dead end, and the bifurcation point goes down, and then if we come back into harmony with nature, humanity continues to grow and develop and evolve. If I remember right, it's been many years since I studied it, but then I think it goes into a spiral type pattern. But the top line goes past the bifurcation point, maybe the length of your finger, and just dead ends, and it means humanity is completely wiped out. And so they warned we were coming to this junction point where we had a choice to either come back into harmony with nature or we were all going to die. And according to them, we're there right now.
Because that was going to be one of my questions. It's interesting that you mentioned the word Hopi, and then obviously there was this question around hope, because hope, it can be an interesting frequency. It can, it can really pull you out of some things, but then also it can be a bit of a mirage at times as well. Touch wood. So I was going to say, do you have hope for where we're headed through this transition?
Well, first of all, I know what the soul is, and I have a lot of deep experiences of God. God's dreaming this all into existence. God cannot be thinking this into existence because thinking requires a duality, which is mathematically a number 2. Number 1 represents being, which is the whole of the creation itself. To being means to be, so you have to be in a state of being. But God is ultimately unconditional love, which can only be symbolized as a 0 mathematically. 0 is everything and no thing simultaneously. So the reality of it is that God cannot possibly be thinking creation into existence because God is a 0 and being comes before mind. So God's actually dreaming itself into existence in order to explore all of its potentials. And that's what all beings are, is there a character in the dream of God that's having such a profound virtual experience of individuality. And without individuality, there is no unity. You can't have a unity of nothing. Just like you can't have a bicycle wheel without spokes. So each individual is like a spoke in a wheel, and the unity is the hub that holds them all together and the rim that holds them all together. So God's actually dreaming itself into existence, and in the dream, God wakes up and says, I am. It's really like Andre Ducombe's podcast is called Know Thyself, right? Because that's what God's doing. It's ultimately exploring its own potentials to realize what it is, because that's all God can do. God, by definition, is absolutely and utterly alone. God is that for which there is no other. Or you don't have God, you've got an idea. So the only way God can experience itself is to look into itself, because there's nothing outside of God to look at. So God looks in dreams, and that's where the Tantra story of Shakti and Shiva comes from. And that's the most beautiful myth to really describe. And so God dreams Shakti into existence, which is divine mother or intelligent energy. And her desire is for a consort, a lover, a friend, and a husband. And so she dreams Shiva into existence. So Shakti, the divine feminine, realizes that she's created by God, and in that moment, there's an awareness of the lover and the beloved. So God becomes her lover, and she is God's lover too, and that causes the flow of energy and information between two points of sentience. And this is why I define love as the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or other. So when any two characters in the dream become aware of each other and what they are, that begins the flow of love, which is how God experiences itself. And mind, by definition, according to Daniel Siegel, mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So once you have 2 points of sentience sharing love, you actually have the flow of energy and information that's embodied. Now you have mind. So love, first you dream, then you love, and love minds itself. So ultimately, what Spirit Gym is God pouring itself into its own dream, and the power of God is infinite, so it's actually imagining itself to be all these characters, but ultimately trying to find itself. And since God is unconditional, God cannot experience itself without matter. So matter gives the ability for God to have a sense of place or a sense of self or body. But because matter is entangled spirit, the spiritual life is the realization that you're not actually the matter. You're the spirit that's forming the matter, that is ultimately consciousness condensing itself into form. And that to really have the freedom that God has built into itself as unconditional love, you've got to slowly grow your awareness of yourself as beyond matter and extract your consciousness out of matter. And that's why remote viewing and astral travel and active imagination are so important, because it shows you that the psyche is actually unlimited, and that you can have shamanic journeys and lucid dreams that are actually more intense and more real than this feeling of being alive itself. And I've had thousands of them, where you come back to this and you realize, wow, this is kind of a sleepy existence compared to what I just experienced. And you realize I'm not my body. I animate my body. I care for my body. I love my body. It gives me a cocoon to grow up in, just like the world is the cocoon that our bodies grow up in. And so ultimately, at every step of the way, the moment that we realize who and what we really are, which is God, God realizes who and what it is. And so that's the grand celebration, you see, because it doesn't matter how awake I am or enlightened I am, Amrit is a one-time expression of the divine. So you could be surrounded by enlightened people and they know God and God knows them, but within you, God hasn't woken up until you wake up. And I'm just using you as a model. So God's like this little kid waiting for the big surprise and to realize itself. So God's like a genius child dreaming all this into existence. It's like a kid that makes a giant video game and says, I'm going to jump in it and I can't get out till I win it. And so God jumps into this material expression of its own dream, and the only way God can win it is to realize who and what it is. And that's what enlightenment is. That's when you realize, oh my God, you think you've been looking around for God and you're like, oh my God, there's nothing here but God. It's like one of God's biggest jokes. It's too funny too. It's so funny. God's got a very sick sense of humor, man. I tell you, man, I've had some powerful experiences with God. I'm like, God can make me laugh so hard I cry for days. It's just the funniest thing. It's sad, it's funny, it's beautiful, it's ugly. I mean, God can't know itself through the good alone, because good has no meaning by itself. So God's as committed to the dark. It says right in the Bible, if you read Isaiah 45:7 in the King James Bible, I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The Christians hated that passage so much about 30 years ago, they started rewriting that passage. But of course, the Bible's never been edited. It's the inspired word of God. It's been edited a billion times. I got entire volumes of books on the editing of the Bible. But there's the truth right there. I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The devil can't create itself. Nothing can create itself. None of us can create and sustain ourselves. That's what makes God God. It's the only reality that can create and sustain itself, being, if you will. But So God invests itself into exploring the darkness, just like we want to go look in caves and find treasures. But God can't, I asked God in a very, very deep meditation, why all the evil in the world? Why can't you do this with more love? And God said to me, Paul, evil upholds the good. To the degree that you have good, you must have evil to counterbalance it. And this is why Carl Jung said, when the Christian church created Jesus Christ, he cast a light so bright they had to create Satan to counterbalance him. Because you can't have a polarity that's unipolar. It's impossible. Because creation itself is a duality. You have to have the light and the dark to have a movie. You have to have the light and the dark to have a hologram. You have to have the light and the dark to have consciousness. Consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites, is Edward Edinger, MD's definition, famous Jungian analyst. And that's exactly right. So the hard pill to swallow is most of these kind of childish religious people want to keep pretending the devil is a force all by itself, but that's ridiculous. Then you got two gods, and you got to say, well, who created them? Now, I'm not condoning evil. I hate evil. That's why I try to do my best to not do it. But what is evil? Evil is anything against life. L-I-V-E backwards is E-V-I-L. So to live backwards is evil. To not love. Evil is the choice not to love. And because God endows us all with free will, God wants us to have the choice to love or not to love God or not to love life or not to love self or not to love. Without that, you have no free will. So the paradox is, without evil, the choice not to love, we would not have free will. We'd all just be robots, biological robots, but we're not. We're endowed with spirit and consciousness, and love is ultimately the only true path to self-realization that takes you all the way home. Love is the verb of God.
It's really interesting because, and I'd love to get your thoughts on compassion for just a moment, if I can. I know I've kept you for the lion's share of today's time together. Because when I started approaching Rudolf Steiner's work, it became really interesting to sort of see that even these, what we call darker forces, there's a certain element of compassion that's espoused. I don't know if this is correct or incorrect, because it's almost like they're playing the roles of these fallen angels in order for you to be able to even witness light, right? Like and then from that place, it's like, wow, like even in your darkness, there is a service there towards the light. Like, and there's this hallowed ground in there that I've found as a bit of a thread is compassion, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I'd just love to get your thoughts on that piece of compassion there.
First of all, most people don't understand the difference between empathy and compassion, so I think we should clear that up. Empathy, to be empathic means to feel the other. Compassion means to understand the other. So, for example, I can't really ever truly have compassion for the pain of childbirth, because I can't give birth to a child. I can only imagine it. But I can be empathetic because, having witnessed the birth of 3 of my own children, standing right there, I can feel the pain my wife's going through because I'm very deeply connected to her, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. But I can't understand what she's really going through. So, but the real meaning of compassion is to have understanding for the drug addict and realize they were once very damaged children, and they don't really realize they're psychopathic, right? They don't know what they're doing. They're acting out a role. I believe they're probably very heavily possessed by dark entities that are here to force us to grow. So they're doing the service of pushing us through our initiation, which is, ultimately to get us to wake up to the God of ourselves, to love of ourselves, to love each other, and to realize what we all are. So you can't have love without empathy, and you can't have love without compassion, because how could you say you love someone if you don't seek to understand them, and how can you love someone without feeling them? So ultimately, empathy and compassion are really important expressions of love. And so they are what allows us to bring the other into ourselves, to feel what it must be like to be a starving person, or to look at someone who's just had their home burned in LA and really have a sense of deep empathy and compassion for them and know, my God, how would we feel if that was us? Or someone who's been flooded out, or, someone who maybe spent their life being as healthy as they could but died of cancer, and it just didn't make sense to anybody. We could really feel, God, how scary and sad and painful that must be, and that inspires us to deeper levels of connection. I think what you're kind of leaning towards is faith. A lot of people have faith, just blind faith, but I tell my students faith should begin where knowledge ends. Because if you're having faith where you need knowledge and you've been lazy, then you can get yourself in a lot of trouble, because you could have faith that the COVID vaccine was actually going to protect you from something, but you were too lazy to do the research to see what was in it. Was it scientifically researched? And ask the most important questions: who, what, why, when, where, and how. So anyone that puts the questions, who's it for, why would you use it, when should you use it, where should it be used, when should it be used, and how does it work, anybody that would have answered those questions would have run from that. But those that just had faith are like children who just trust mommy and daddy are going to take care of them, and we know that often doesn't work out too very well. And so, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is faith should begin where the work of honestly educating yourself ends, because we can never know the truth of a lot of things, no matter how much we study. I've studied my whole life, and there's, the more you learn, the more you have bigger questions and the more you want to know. So it's kind of a trick. But like when I'm relying on faith, it's after making a legitimate effort to educate myself. And there's certain things that I just have to trust. Like, it doesn't matter how much I educate myself about how many fires are in California. Just 2 weeks ago, within 30 miles of my house was 4 fires, any one of which could made it to our house within 24 hours with winds. We had winds here going 60 miles an hour, shaking the whole house. Like, that wind changed direction and we're done. And, we got a whole farm here. There's no way I could evacuate all these animals and everything. I'd have to take the kids and the computers and the passports and the money and run. And that would break my heart. So there's where I have to have faith. And that's where I can have empathy and compassion for those that weren't so fortunate and let's call it lucky. So that's kind of my summary of the difference between faith, empathy, and compassion.
Thank you for that. Last little question, promise. You have mentioned throughout this conversation today that guided by my soul. You've used this in throughout. Yeah. It's like my soul guided me, or my soul said. I'm not sure that's a very common phrase for people in their day-to-day living. They don't necessarily have that connection to their soul.
That's proof that religion is dysfunctional, because ultimately only God can give a soul, so the soul is God within you. The soul is consciousness within you. To point this out, I will quote St. Francis of Assisi, who people keep constantly asking him, how do I find God? How do I find God? And his answer is quite profound. What you are looking for is what's looking. How do I find God? What you are looking for is what's looking. That's the soul. The soul is God inside of you, pretending not to know that it's God, so they can have an authentic experience of its own self-realization. Okay, so the soul is ultimately, simply stated, consciousness within you. It's what's having the experience of life. Spirit is the flow of energy and information. So the analogy that I give to my students, because it's simple and it helps clarify it, is if you're playing a shaman's drum, a simple frame drum. When I'm going to do a healing for someone, I connect to their soul and say, what rhythm would bring you into harmony? And their soul tells me the rhythm. So then when I move the drumstick at that rhythm, once the drumstick hits the skin, it hits a membrane. The spirit is the flow of energy and information that's informing me what to do with the drumstick. But without the membrane to interact, the implicate order, the invisible realm of spirit, cannot be experienced in the physical realm. So the soul is the drum and the membrane. And the membrane is what captures the flow of spirit to create vibration. And that's how the soul has an experience. So the soul is like the drum. It creates sound, it vibrates, and it has feeling, let's say, metaphorically. And the spirit is what's moving the drumstick. The spirit is what's making Carlos Santana play the notes he's playing, and Stevie Wonder sing and play the way he does. You see him and Ray Charles tapped into the flow of spirit, but they're accessing your soul because the membranes of your body are capturing the sound and the vibration, and they're playing the sounds of God. And that's why you have such a profound experience listening to an ensouled artist, because spirit, they're channeling spirit. Like if you've ever listened to Hilary Stagg, if you haven't listened to Hilary Stagg play the harp, you haven't heard God on a harp, right? Just search Hilary Stagg on any search system and listen to like Feather Light, for example. I mean, I play that in deep shamanic journeys and it grounds and stabilizes people. Or, I mean, just think of all the great singers that just capture your soul, right? Even great rock bands like, the Rolling Stones or any of them, right? When they really, you feel the spirit hitting the soul, and they're channeling the spirit through the instrument, which vibrates your soul and gives you an experience. So the soul is the consciousness within you that's having the experience of being alive. And spirit is the flow of energy and information that is the animating factor that gives the soul the experience. And the body is the membrane that allows us to connect to the invisible, implicate domain of spirit, the immeasurable domain. And the classical domain of physics is where the body is at. And that's where the soul goes and inhabits membranes in order to feel the vibration of life and love and creativity. So when I say I'm connecting to my soul, I'm connecting to the consciousness within myself. But in technical terms, you cannot have a soul without a spirit, because there would be nothing for a soul to experience without the flow of energy and information or God consciousness. And your thoughts are spirit. Your emotions are spirit. And your soul feels it all. And your soul is what remembers the experience of life. And so your soul has memory, and your soul is linked to the Akashic record. So all of us are actually God having the experience, and the soul is what's remembering it. So God wakes up to itself. And if you study Hinduism, this is the cycles of Brahma, the creation of a universe, the ages of the yugas, the self-realization, and the complete destruction and the rebirth of another God. And this goes on eternally. That's what God does.
And Shiv Shakti's place in both of those?
What's that? Well, Shakti is the divine mother. So she's the one that's responsible for, she's the principle of desire. She's the feminine. She's the emptiness of God. And she dreams Shiva into existence to fulfill her. So Shiva is anything that's manifesting. So she is the womb of God's dreaming, and Shiva represents everything pouring out of the womb as something tangible: stars, planets, moons, galaxies, universes, people, bugs, everything that exists that you can see, weigh, or measure is the embodiment of God. And Shakti is the womb of creation, where intelligent energy takes spirit and embodies it and gives birth to it. So Shiva really represents the created, and Shakti represents the womb of creation, where spirit dreams it all into existence and condenses the energy and the consciousness to manifest it as Shiva. So everything is Shiva, and they're all Shakti's children, including Shiva.
Pole check. My goodness, we've been here for a minute, and yet I feel like I'm still just scratching the surface. There is So much wisdom here, and I'm so excited to link Spirit Gym below for people that want to go dive in even deeper. Like you said, not for the faint of heart. It appears to you when you're ready.
Yeah, just so you know, there's 75 lessons for the members if you join the full membership over about 82 hours. So I summarized my 15-volume book set. The first volume's about to come out any day now. It's over 3,000 pages of writing on all aspects of holistic spiritual development. And it's based on principles. And so the 75 lessons take the principles of Spirit Gym that go from 0 through 10 and teaches you, being, duality, the dreaming trinity, the principle of the 4, wholeness 5, working through challenges 6, foundation principles 7, as the principle of the spirit and the soul, the 7 chakras, 8 is self-reflection, 9 is a new level of awareness, 10 is a new level of being. So you've got all the lessons on nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, movement. They're full of self-development exercises, legitimate shadow work, creating your own myth, illustrating your own myth. And there's a great community of over 200 people now. And then you got the podcast, and you got, there's a lower level membership where you can just do the sanghas. I do a weekly sangha where everybody meets online and I give them a lesson. Sometimes I just do open Q&A to help them with the lessons or any challenges. I coach them just like my private clients, and they all get to learn from each other. So we have a weekly sangha. So it's a full-on university. I put a ton of time and energy into synthesizing 15 volumes into 75 lessons, so anyone could really learn and grow and heal and develop how to connect with their soul, how to connect with their spirit, and how to get the inner guidance they need, and how to have an authentic, personal, spiritual life, and get clear on what God means to you and what's important to you and what your dream is and what your role is in the grand play of life, and what your values are, and how the mind works, and how to manage your mind, and how to grow your mind, and all the things that are important that I have to teach people all the time when they come to me with all sorts of diseases and life crises and everything else.
Paul, thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly here today. And honestly, I feel like that pales in comparison to the gratitude I do want to extend to you. The first book of yours I ever got, and I'm not even embarrassed to admit this, was a very thin little book which was distilled with all its wisdom called Abs.
Yeah, I forgot that. Awesome Abs, it was called.
Awesome Abs.
I wrote that in like 88 or 89.
Bro, and again, just similar to like just your ability to distill is just phenomenal. And man, I'm like grateful for the time and energy. I feel very honored to have you here today. It means a lot to me personally.
Thank you.
And also for me, the universe is folded in, looking in on itself, having this incredible experience. I'm so grateful that Paul Chek is one of those emanations over there.
Thank you. Well, we're all in it together, right? We've all got something special to share. And I'm just somebody who really embraced that and went with it because it felt good. And I think when we're doing what we came here to do, we're making love every day, and that's sustainable. But if we're not, then we're just laboring, and that's not sustainable, and it leads to addiction and health crisis and relationship crisis ultimately, which is to wake you up to say, hey, quit playing stupid games with yourself and go do what you love to do so that you can love every day, and that's really the difference. Is I focused on what I love to do and what made me feel good, which was helping other people. And so that's been the what has empowered my whole 63 years of being on this planet.
And I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you. And I'm grateful for you for sharing all your great podcasts with people, because that's how we got to do it. We got to, do what we love to do, and that's the way we change the world.
Aho.
Aho, Great Spirit. When you do what you love to do, you're magnetic. People are drawn to you. They feel it.
Touch.
And that's how we up-level them and inspire them.
Yeah.
That's how I built the whole institute, is just sharing my love everywhere. My belief is I don't care what plan you're on, as long as it's keeping you healthy and vital. But if you stick to an ideology at the expense of listening to your body, then you're going to suffer the pain and consequences of not having a deep spiritual relationship with your body.
Yeah.
Vegetarianism is a belief system. But listening to your body, that's a spiritual practice.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's this component of like in the Sikh faith, like just like the plant is just as much an emanation of God's creation as the lion is, you know, as the lamb is, you know.
Yep.
It's about finding and honoring the balance within you know, the best of our ability. And you know, I know you espouse organic and, you know, as honoring as of the animal as possible.
The other thing too that we all have to remember is that whatever you eat becomes human. So when you're eating a chicken, it's getting an upgrade to human. Its spirit enters your body, and to the degree you bring that into yourself with the intention of using its love, its life, and its spirit to make the world a better place for all living beings, then nothing dies. It's actually making a rapid evolutionary jump to being human. So you can't kill the soul of anything. Energy produced can only be transformed, right? That's the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah. So where the vegetarians get it wrong is they actually think they're killing things. But I say you can't kill God. All you can do is transform God. So if you want to kill something, then eat an animal and go keep being an ignorant person and destroying the planet and destroying yourself. Then you are killing. But when you bring something in as out of grace and out of the sacrifice of devoting yourself to helping make the world a better place for all living beings, you haven't killed anything. You've actually brought it up to the level where it can actually contribute to making the world a better place, because chickens don't have much power to do that. Neither do cows or sheep or deer. They're living out sort of a process in nature. But human beings have free will and choice. So when you take a piece of lamb and eat it, you're now upgrading it to where it actually has the ability to contribute with free will, choice, and higher consciousness. And that would be like you becoming an avatar if you got eaten by an avatar and all of a sudden you woke up and you were a Buddha. You'd say, well, it was worth it.
To imagine that, yeah. It is, inspired souls, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Paul Chek, my goodness, absolutely amazing. Such an incredible conversation, touchwood, even if I can say so myself. Such an honor to have him on the podcast. And thank you so much for listening all the way through to the end. Your inspirations to evolve are truly inspiring me on my path as well. Thank you so much for your love and blessings. And to all of you that are subscribed to the podcast, thank you so much for your incredible love and support. Like I say, literally, seriously, everything around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much. The total labor of love powered by you. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please join the movement, yeah? Take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the subscribe button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. Help us, join us, promoting love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. On screen now, 3 handpicked episodes by YouTube. One of them is with Robert J. Gilbert on Rosicrucian wisdom, which dives in even deeper on some really incredible topics that Paul and I were discussing today as well. On screen for you now to continue your journey onwards, upwards, and inwards. So go on, take your pick, make your click, and I'll see you in the next one. Go on, I'll see you there.